the Pope who broke the silence of the Vatican. They call him the Pope of the people. Others call him a heretic. But who truly is the man behind the white papal robe? In a world marked by scandal, war, and a rising tide of disbelief, a name emerged from the shadows of the Vatican, carrying not just the weight of a 2,000-year-old institution, but the hope of millions. His name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, but the world would come to know him as Francis, the first Jesuit pope, the first South American, and the first to take the name of the poor man's saint, Francis of Assisi. When he first appeared on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, there was no showmanship, no rehearsed gestures, just tired eyes and a phrase no one expected: "Pray for me." And in that moment, the world knew something had shifted. But the true story of Pope Francis begins long before the cameras, long before the conclave, even before the quiet corridors of the Vatican. It begins in Buenos Aires, in humble alleys, where a shy young boy discovered that true faith doesn't reside on altars, but in the eyes of those who suffer. In this video, you'll uncover not only the milestones of a pope's life, you'll step into the mysteries, the controversies, and the spiritual awakenings that made Francis a figure both beloved and criticized, revered and questioned. Prepare to walk behind the scenes of a soul carrying more weight than the world can see. And by the end, you may find yourself asking, could he be the final shepherd before the end? On a December morning in 1936, Buenos Aires woke to the scent of coffee, the hum of trams, and the quiet hope of a new day. In the home of humble Italian immigrants, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born, the first of 5 children to Mario and Regina. No one could have imagined that this quiet, fragile boy would one day ascend to the highest seat in the Catholic Church. As a child, Jorge was introspective. He loved to read, to observe, to listen. He was different. While other boys dreamed of fame or fortune, he found himself lost in thoughts about human suffering. His grandmother, a woman of unshakable faith, was the first to plant in his heart the idea of a compassionate God, not distant, but intimately present. In his teenage years, Bergoglio studied chemistry and worked in a laboratory. Yes, before he became a priest, he was a scientist. But it was in the hushed corridors of a hospital, while fighting a severe lung infection, that something happened. As he struggled to breathe, suspended between life and death, he felt a calling, not a voice, not a sound, but an impulse, a restlessness, a silent certainty. His life was no longer his own. At 21, he took a quiet and definitive step. He entered the Jesuit seminary, not for status, not out of obligation, but from vocation. He wanted to serve. More than that, he wanted to understand the depth of human suffering. The following years were marked by silence, study, and surrender. He learned that being a Jesuit meant living with one foot on the altar and the other on the streets. He embraced poverty, chastity, and obedience. But above all, he learned this: God does not dwell solely in cathedrals. He is found in the eyes of the sick, in the hands of a prisoner, and in the tear of a forgotten mother. Jorge believed he was ready, but what was coming, the persecution, the silence, the moral dilemmas, would test his faith like never before. The 1970s in Argentina were not years of peace. They were years of shadows. A military dictatorship had gripped the nation with an iron hand. Dissent was crushed, and thousands of people disappeared without a trace. Fear settled like a fog over Buenos Aires. And in the middle of it all stood a priest named Jorge Mario Bergoglio. By 36, he had already become the provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina, a position of both influence and enormous responsibility. But influence during a dictatorship is a double-edged sword. Every word, every silence, every look could mean life or death. Bergoglio believed in the power of discretion. He didn't stand on stages shouting condemnations. he moved in silence. While some accused him of complicity, others whispered stories of how he hid persecuted people in churches, forged documents, and negotiated with military officials to free detainees. One story stands out. Two Jesuit priests, Orlando Yorio and Francisco Jalix, were kidnapped and tortured by the regime. Their abduction cast a dark cloud over Bergoglio. Had he failed them, or had he saved their lives by working behind the scenes? Bergoglio never fully explained what happened. He carried the weight of those years in silence, haunted by what he could and couldn't do. But one thing is clear. The trauma of that era carved something into his soul. A deep understanding of human fragility, power, and consequence. He began to see the church not as a fortress, but as a field hospital. A place where wounds are tended, not judged. In the years that followed, Jorge was both praised and criticized. He walked a tightrope between activism and survival. But in private, he prayed like a man holding the weight of thousands of silent cries. What no one could see back then was that the man surviving the dictatorship would one day lead the church itself, and carry that same principle with him. That true power lies not in condemnation, but in mercy. By the 1990s, Jorge Mario Bergoglio had already become a name known throughout Argentina's Catholic circles. But unlike most rising churchmen, he didn't bask in the spotlight. He walked through mud, rode buses with the poor, and avoided the gilded halls of clerical comfort. When he was appointed auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires in 1992, many expected him to change, to polish his shoes, adopt the grandeur of the role, and blend into the hierarchy. But Bergoglio remained. Bergoglio. He would often be seen walking through slums, carrying his own bags, sitting beside addicts and single mothers without a trace of judgment in his eyes. His sermons were simple. His tone was direct. His presence deeply unsettling for those who preferred a church of distance and prestige. In 1998, he was appointed Archbishop of Buenos Aires. That same year, Argentina was on the edge of an economic collapse. People were starving, suicide rates rose, and the church was silent. Except for one man, Bergoglio's voice became a quiet roar. He criticized the indifference of politicians and called for the church to become a poor church for the poor. He turned down the archbishop's mansion and lived in a simple apartment. He cooked his own meals. He refused a chauffeur and chose to take public transport instead. In 2001, during Argentina's darkest economic moment, he was named a cardinal by Pope John Paul II. The Vatican extended to him every comfort, every ceremonial garment, every symbol of prestige. He declined most of it. He chose simplicity. But more than that, he chose to disturb the silence. In Rome, some admired him, others feared him. A cardinal who didn't play the political games. A man who, in meetings, would often say little but observe everything. And when he did speak, his words cut through the room like a blade. He was not climbing, he was serving. But even Jorge couldn't have imagined what awaited him. Because in 2013, a thunderstorm would pass through the Vatican. A resignation never seen before in modern times. And a conclave that would summon the cardinal with dirty shoes into the center of the world stage. The unexpected conclave. When the world heard Franciscus, lightning struck the dome of St. Peter's Basilica on February 11th, 2013, the day Pope Benedict XVI announced his resignation. A pope resigning? It was unheard of. A moment that sent shockwaves not only through the church, but through history itself. And somewhere in Argentina, far from the marble corridors of the Vatican, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio quietly packed his suitcase. He was going to Rome, but not to be chosen. He believed his time had passed. He had already submitted his resignation as Archbishop of Buenos Aires. His heart was at peace. He would vote, then return home. But fate, or something divine, had other plans. The conclave began under a shroud of tension. The church was facing scandal, division, and growing disconnection from its people. Cardinals whispered behind closed doors, casting ballots, praying for a shepherd who could heal a wounded flock. On the fifth ballot, the name Bergoglio began to echo louder and louder. And when the final vote was cast, the impossible had happened. He was chosen. The white smoke rose above the Sistine Chapel. The world waited in anticipation. Who was the man behind the curtain? When Jorge Mario Bergoglio stepped out onto the balcony, the crowd fell silent. No grand gestures, no political language, just humility and a single trembling request. Pray for me. He had chosen a name never used before by any pope. Francis. Inspired by Francis of Assisi, the saint of the poor, the rebel of peace, the voice of humility. It wasn't just a name. It was a declaration. In that moment, the world met a different kind of pope. One who rejected the golden cross in favor of iron. One who refused the papal palace. One who paid his hotel bill personally the morning after being elected. Cardinals called him a surprise. The people called him hope. But inside, Jorge knew. The burden he now carried was far heavier than the white robes on his shoulders. Because now, the world would watch his every step. And the mission he felt since his hospital bed, to walk with those who suffer, would now be tested on a global stage. A pope of paradoxes, reformer, rebel, and shepherd. From the moment he uttered the name Francis, something shifted in the Vatican air. This was not going to be a papacy of routine. This was going to be a papacy of rupture. Pope Francis began doing things that made the traditionalists uneasy. He washed the feet of prisoners, including women and Muslims. He embraced people disfigured by disease in front of millions. He warned bishops against living like princes and told cardinals to smell like their sheep. To some, he was a breath of divine air. To others, a dangerous reformer. Inside the Vatican, murmurs grew. His efforts to clean up the Vatican Bank, to confront sexual abuse, and to decentralize power were seen as bold, even reckless. He spoke out against consumerism, climate change, and inequality. He called for mercy over judgment. He questioned rigidity in matters of doctrine. In short, he was doing what Christ had done, and it made many uncomfortable. Yet Francis never seemed afraid. He moved with a quiet strength, rooted not in political strategy, but in prayer. He would wake before dawn, kneel alone in the chapel, and carry the silent weight of a world begging for meaning. But even his compassion had its limits. Critics accused him of being vague, too lenient, too political. He was praised by atheists and condemned by conservative Catholics. He was both embraced and misunderstood. And still, he kept walking. One moment, he would be visiting a favela in Brazil. The next, standing before the United Nations, urging leaders to care for the planet. Then again, kneeling before a statue of the Virgin Mary, eyes closed, as if whispering a secret only heaven could hear. Francis is not a pope of clear definitions. He is a paradox, gentle, yet firm, spiritual, yet fiercely grounded. A man who leads the largest religious institution on earth, and yet walks as if barefoot in the dust. But perhaps this is why he was chosen, not to confirm expectations, but to wake up a sleeping church, with the same voice that once called him in a hospital room decades ago. The soul behind the white robe. Behind the headlines, the controversies, and the applause, there is still the same man who once lay in a hospital bed, gasping for breath, asking God what his life was meant to become. Pope Francis is not a perfect man. He never claimed to be. But perhaps that's what makes his journey so powerful. He is a pope who dares to be human, who carries the dust of the streets on his cassock and the ache of the world in his prayers. A shepherd who walks not above, but among. a voice that whispers mercy in a world screaming for justice. Some say he is too modern, others say he is too old-fashioned. But maybe he's just exactly what the church needs now. Not a ruler, a witness. And as the world spins deeper into division and despair, maybe it's no coincidence that a man named after the Saint of Peace was placed at its center. So now, we ask you, what do you see when you look at Pope Francis? A rebel, a reformer, or simply a disciple? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because the world needs more stories that remind us holiness can still walk the earth.